I remember showing somebody a picture similar to this and saying to the person that this is what some Zulu people wore prior to Europeans arriving in Africa. And of course, they denied everything I was saying that this is the most modern thing ever. And if they were to see anything even slightly close to this, even slightly sophisticated, and they would be very impressed. Now, of course, what I did was I went and did a lot of research because I already knew that it was out there. And I came back and I showed it to the person. Now, this person did not listen to anything I was saying. He was so convinced that this type of clothing is so new, it's so modern, that Africans could have never built it. So I left him. I even wanted to show him different patterns, which he thought I was just going crazy. He said, it's okay to do the white color, but once you start exaggerating with these, then you're really trying me on. And so I said to him, let's watch a documentary. And I showed him a documentary that's called Why Poverty? And it was about the kingdoms around the world and how poverty and how they dealt with poverty in their regions. And of course, in there, they talked about African textiles and how at some point they were used as money. And like I said, these are obviously made by Europeans, but Africans had made better quality earlier. The main thing that was important is that they fused a lot of their cotton with other forms, which could become thicker, lighter, heavier, and all that. And as you can see, some of it was like just a raggish thing, and then others were very, very elaborate based on what Europeans were saying. But how far back does it really go? How far back does it go in Africa? Are we talking, you know, maybe 1000 BC? Are we talking 500 AD? Are we talking 1100 AD, which is the common name or the common date that is given? We're talking way before this. So the main fiber, cotton, that was the main texture that was used, or textile that was used in Africa at a time, was linen in Egypt, and we can find loads of evidence for this. But then we can also find it elsewhere. But first, let's see this video.
The different indigenous environments throughout the old world and the new world. So, what archaeologists believe is that people in the Indus Valley were the first to spin and weave cotton into fiber. Now, first is relative because we don't actually know, but what we know is that although it originated in the Indus Valley, that is also the place where we think cotton spinning originated. And so, the Indian subcontinent more broadly was the largest producer of cotton really until the 18th century, and what is now modern day India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan were the first indigenous communities to be spinning and weaving cotton. And so some of the processes used in this area was first they would remove the seeds with a roller gin. So they created a tool to remove the lint from the seeds. Then they used a bow to remove the dirt and the knots. So another tool was created for this other process. And then it was spun, the fiber was spun on a distaff, which is yet a third tool that was created specifically to spin the fiber, and then a spindle to make the thread, and then woven on looms, which are hung between trees or hung between little strong plants, as you can see in this image. And it was used for personal use, for clothing, to sell in local and regional markets, and it was grown alongside food crops. So already we're seeing that indigenous humans are creating tools and processes around making this natural plant into a natural fiber. And so, almost simultaneously, but a few thousand years later on the Pacific coasts, indigenous people independently also started turning cotton into fiber. One such group was the Aztecs, and the Aztec word for cotton is icatal. And the Aztecs would have been in what is modern day Mexico. And their process was a little different. Mostly, they separated the lit from the seeds by hand. They then beat it using like a mortal or something that they was strong and hard to beat it, combed it using another tool that was created, and then put it through a spindle to make thread. And so in this image, you'll see a sort of indigenous visual rendering of a woman spinning cotton thread in what would have been Aztec society. And it was also used for daily use. It was also used for armor. Aztec warriors are known for having very thick and ornate as cotton armor. It was used for exchange, for tributes to gods and emperors. It was used as a gift. And similarly to in the Indus River Valley, it was grown alongside subsistence crops such as maize. We go back across the globe to East Africa and then West Africa, which both developed their own cotton culture around this same time. There's about 100, more than 100 African languages that had a word for cotton as early as the 10th century. And so what we think is that most likely cotton was brought to North Africa through Islamic imperialism in the 8th century, and then it spread to East Africa and Southwest through trade routes and other types of expansion. And by the 11th century, West Africa was really a world center of cotton cultivation. Cotton was grown perennially in kinship groups and communities on a small scale across tropical West Africa, again, because this is the ideal climate for cotton to be grown in.
So, what we see here is the common belief, which is that Africans got the idea of cotton and spinning cotton and making cottons and fibers from Muslims. Now, again, this would make sense, but it doesn't for a couple reasons. One, plenty of places that had nothing to do with Islam in Africa had cotton. But it's even worse than that. The type of cotton they had nothing to do with the cotton that the Arabs had. The cotton that the Arabs had would actually be very different because in the Coptic times, which is what is called the Coptic times, we would see a reduction of cotton only returning when the Muslims came back. What we need for this is a study. So let's go. This is the true history of cotton in Africa and how it was cultivated and used at times. So, first of all, what we do know is that African cotton is made from something very different than the one in India. But we know that it was cultivated around 2600 BC. In fact, it goes way before this, as you will see, as they will discuss. So, first things first. The cotton plant was recorded from Egypt in the dynastic period as early as 2500 BC. Cotton seeds were recovered from Nubia in 1964. Many writers and relief sculptures, as well as hieroglyphic symbols, confirm cotton cultivation during this period. Cotton cultivation dominated in the Ptolemaic period, and blah blah blah. Later, Ashmuni cotton was derived from Sea Island cotton. Okay, so what we see here is cotton being found in Nubia. Notice how they put brackets Egypt, but it's actually in Nubia. And you will see that it's not something that was commonly used in Egypt, but it was in Nubia. Now, far from the Muslims giving Africans cotton and making us quote unquote modern, in real life, what happened is Africa used this textile so long time ago that the only true assumption that has to do with it being from another place has to do with the Indus Valley. We would have to have communication with the Indus Valley. As we read, the origin of the cotton plant and the date of its first usage are still uncertain. Gulati and Turner relate the earliest known record of cotton in India, where the excavation at Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley in northwest India took place. These excavations revealed the presence of cotton fiber, which was examined microscopically and showed typical cotton fiber characteristics of Gossypium arboreum. This site was dated back to about 3000 BC. However, Wheeler redated the Mohenjo-daro site to 2500 to 1700 BC. The cotton type is still grown in India. Gossypium arboreum grows in different parts of Africa, especially Sudan and Ethiopia. It may be indigenous, but this is uncertain. Gossypium arboreum and Gossypium hebraican were introduced to Africa in the early time. Their perennial representatives in Africa were recorded. Bird and Mala reported that the excavations of Hacaperta, North Peru, recovered fishing nets, lamps, wicks, and textile fragments from different ground levels dating back to 2400 BC, 1700 BC, and 1600 to 1500 BC, respectively. The investigation of these samples revealed that they were made of Gossypium barbadens. Now, we all know that cotton serves more than one purpose, and here we see in Africa the seeds of the cotton plant being used by humans 2600 BC, which is earlier than when we see the usage of the cotton plant in India. So we read the archaeobotany in a certain area provides information about the human activities, ancient settlements, and floristic composition of the area. The archaeological works dealing with the oldest cotton samples in the world are outlined in Table 1. So the first one we have Mohenjo-daro, that's the Indus Valley, 2500 BC. And then we have Hakkah-Pritte, 2400 BC. Then we have Merowe in Sudan, 300 BC. Then we have Karanong in Nubia, 300 BC. Then we have the Nubian cotton seeds, 2600 BC. So we will carry on. And of course, every time they're saying Nubia, Egypt, the reason they're saying this is because the plant was cultivated in Nubia and then refined in Nubia in many cases. But then we find samples of those traded cottons in Egypt. So the history of cotton in Egypt, according to the same study, I haven't changed anything. The dynastic period, 2600 BC to 520 BC. In 1964, Gosh reported on the excavation of Afia area, 15 kilometers north of Annaba, the headquarters of Egyptian Nubia, and revealed a few cotton seeds and fibers collected among other plant materials. Gosh estimated the age of the plant's materials at the Afia site using carbon-14 labeling method to be 2600 to 2400 BC. The anatomical study of cotton seed, coat, and fibers collected illustrates that this ancient Nubian cotton is similar to Gossypium arboreum var. Sudanese and G. herbicon var. Africanum. The fiber samples show an early stage of evolution from the wild to cultivated cotton. The seeds recovered from animal dung indicate that Nubians at the time did not seem to have potential knowledge of cottonseed fiber for making textiles. They most probably have used cotton seeds for animal feeding. So what you're seeing here is a swift evolution. The plant has been cultivated, but it's not being used as a fiber necessarily. But you do see, as they point out there, fibers later, but you don't see them immediately. Meaning that when they were brought there, they weren't brought there as the finished product that they had to invent. The hieroglyph symbol, as well as the seed found in Thebes, indicate that ancient Egyptians knew cotton as early as 2400 BC. Nubian cotton was probably growing in this area as a natural extension of the Sudanese Nubia, as the natural extension of the Sudanese Nubia. Handosa states that during the 11th dynasty, Sudan was a part of the Egyptian kingdom under the control of Senusret, and taxes, animal crops, and probably cotton seeds were sent to the Egyptian capital Thebes. Microscopic examinations of mummy bandages showed that some of them were made of cotton. Herodotus mentioned that during the 26th dynasty, Pharaoh Amasis II presented Lacaде Minoan's temple in Rome with two wonderful cotton corsets. Now, of course, it would be ridiculous to think that these people in Egypt who could make linen and wore it and they cared about it couldn't use cotton, but of course they did. And of course, it came from Nubia, and the Nubians had full knowledge, like everybody else, about the ability of cotton. And as you can see here, because of Herodotus, pre Greek, pre Roman influence in Africa using cotton as a substance. And remember, cotton, really for millions of years, naturally originated in Africa and then it spread. Now, the Ptolemaic period, or time, they obviously at that point knew about cotton, but remember, Europe had an absence of cotton. They were using wool. They had an absence of cotton and really high fibers up until they got to Egypt. And so when they got to Egypt, cotton cultivation through the Ptolemaic period was increased due to the cottonseed imported from India by Alexander the Great during his military activities. Other authors reported the flourishing of cotton cultivation in Ptolemaic and Roman periods due to its use by priests and monks as well as for temple gifts. The excavation during 300 BC to AD 300 at Meroe in Sudan and Karaanong in the Egyptian Nubia revealed the presence of a cotton textile made of Gossypium abramum var. Sudanese. Griffith and Crowfoot, 1934, Hutchison, 1944. Pliny, who lived in Egypt AD 100, describes a shrub called Gossypium or xylin, from which xylina cloth was made. This shrub, which grew in Upper Egypt towards Arabia, appeared from Pliny's description to be G. arboreum. So, like I said, the use of cotton disappeared. So, as far as we know, samples or textiles were certainly identified as cotton in this period. The Egyptian Coptic Museum, Cairo, has many decorated and undecorated fine textile specimens, none of them cited to be made of cotton. Also, cotton is not mentioned in the documentary book about the Coptic Museum by Maria and Gergis, as well as no information are available to me through the Coptic Encyclopedia. Before I go on, I want to first state something, which of course you've seen in this study. It says 350 BC, we had some Nubians building textiles back then. So already this idea of text like cotton being brought by Islamic doesn't make sense because Islam obviously is in the 600 to 700 period. At first held the view that Gossypium domesticated might have originated in the Indus Valley. Later, Hutchinson accepted that G. herbacum var. Africanum was truly wild in southern Africa, stated that from there the cultivated cottons of commerce might have originated. G. herbacum var. Arcanum has been collected from Nubia, Egypt, and Libya. This variety is the wild cotton variety native to South Africa and southern Rhodesia. Later, Hutchinson also acknowledged the possibility that G. arboricum is indigenous to India and was originally wild there. However, G. arboretum L was not recorded in what could be regarded as an undoubted indigenous habitat in any country. A new concept can be accepted through knowledge derived from archaeological gypsum samples of G. herbicum and G. arborum collected from Egyptian Nubia 2600 to 2400 BC as seeds recovered from animal dung. The fiber of these archaeological samples show an early stage of evolution from the wild to the cultivated cotton. This established its culture by man. On the other hand, a textile of G. abricum was recovered from Mohenjo-daro as textile fragments and strings, revealed human activities and knowledge of cotton processing. However, these fragments did not identify the type of cotton used, whether cultivated or wild. Primitive perennial types of G. arborum and G. herbicum were recorded in Africa. Summary of our knowledge from these archaeological and recent samples is the origin of cotton, arborum, and or G. herbicum domestication, and is and its presence as early stages of evolution from wild from can be developed separately in India and Egypt or Africa. So two separate histories that go back thousands of years, 2600 in the case of Africa. Now, there are multiple studies, whatever, that we can look at that show that African textiles truly did come from Africa and probably originate from this Nubian birth and then spread through the Sahara and down the other way. And so this would be very different than the story that we're told that it was up until the 10th century. And the reason why, one of the reasons why that falls flat is because we actually do have Muslim scholars who wrote prior to the date of the 10th century, and they write about seeing cotton. They write about seeing Africans with cottons, both Zanj and the people, the Abyssinians and the Nubians, and of course the Egyptians. So them introducing something to them that they already have would be a pretty weird claim. We know from pre and post Islamic times that Africans were dressed very well and even were using textiles that we today think were foreign to them. We even know they imported silks. This is the words of several explorers. So why is it that some people just put a date like, okay, Muslim trade, North Africa? Something you'll notice is they use the exact same dates. They use the exact same places. So for example, North Africa, they say North Africa trades cotton with Africa, southern parts of Africa, and that's where they got the cotton from. Which to me, okay, that's fine. But who? Who are you talking about that's in North Africa? They did this. For some reason, they say it's the Muslims, which is not true because we see textiles in Africa prior to that date, cotton textiles in Africa prior to that date. And like I showed you in one of those things, by the 3rd century BC, cotton was already there in North Africa. So, what are we talking about? Now, we could sit here and talk about just cotton or talk about the fact that the Africans also cultivated a bunch of other stuff that we like palm oil and stuff like that that we did not see outside of Africa until the modern times. So it's like those guys brought things to Africa and then Africans simultaneously invented unique ways of doing things. something it doesn't make sense. And also, not to mention, how many times do these people emphasize how North Africans did not move into quote unquote sub-Saharan Africa, and that there is no direct connection between the cultures of sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa? But again, when it's convenient, there it is. It comes back, and suddenly Africa is, getting all of its ideas from North Africa. And again, I'll stress, we invented iron before any of these other places could ever bring it to us. And finally, I'll close by saying this two things. One, whether or not we got the textiles from elsewhere, we used them in the historic periods going back 1000 BC and onwards. Secondly, I want to say that I'm kind of jealous of the Americas because they're so far away that almost nothing they invent can be blamed on any other civilization but their own. It's only because Africa is so close to everybody else that the blame is basically everyone but the Africans. It's a pretty upsetting thing, but the evidence keeps piling up on and on and on.